Okay, guys, welcome to another episode of the Funky Marketing Podcast. Today I have the great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Lazar Dzamic, one of my favorite thinkers when it comes to not just marketing, but business and life overall. Author, lecturer, somebody who has worked in Google, and someone whose books and lectures helped me a lot actually when I started to work first as a GM and to lead the company to see actually the big picture. So Lazar, maybe you can tell a little bit more about yourself because there are so many things to be said over there.
Thank you very much, Nemanja, for a very, very kind introduction. So I spent almost 20 years in London as an account planner, strategist, and strategy director in several advertising agencies. And then the last 2.5 years of my stay in London, I was the head of brand planning for the Google's super exclusive creative think tank, the Zoo. Basically, the Zoo is a special resource given only to the biggest clients that Google has. So basically, almost anybody that spends at least tens of millions of dollars a year on Google. And that was a fantastic vantage point for me, working with the world's biggest brands. Brand directors and marketing directors and their agencies as well. So on both sides of the table, and then actually observing what keeps them awake at night. And I have to say, it was the same, more or less the same set of issues, but for me, it was a brilliant vantage point to actually scan the situation and to try to understand myself at the time, where is marketing going and what's happening today.
Yeah, sounds like a great guest to talk about the future of marketing, of advertising, and when everything is going, especially having in mind that we are now living in the times that nobody could predict with COVID-19 and pandemic and lockdowns and all kind of different things. So let's start with some things that you are seeing right now happening at the end of the 2020 and having in mind that we are maybe approaching the whole half of the next year, maybe in a similar environment.
Well, there's several things to say about what's happening now. I mean, one of the things I certainly think is true is that Corona has just accelerated many of the things that we've seen happening before. So I call it accelerated inevitability. We actually saw it was inevitable for many brands, many companies, many organizations to become more digital. It was inevitable for them to start discovering this new hybrid media space in which both the old and the new are working together, and to start making kind of more sense of their strategies, how they're going to approach that. That leads me to that old chestnut I very often refer to. Many people actually have said, I think Tom Goodwin was one of them, maybe even one of the first to actually say that sentence. We actually don't need digital strategy. We need strategy for the digital age. And that's a completely different thing. That actually means that we have to find a way to integrate the old with the new. And when I say the old, I mean, we still talk to people. That hasn't changed. The ultimate aim of marketing overall, in all its definitions and guises, is that on the other side of whatever we do is the group of people that we will actually like to connect with. And that hasn't changed. It's exactly the same. So in that sense, we need to realize what are the business and the marketing the ways of thinking that have been successful for more than 100 years and are still absolutely valid today. And Professor Mark Ritson, Professor Byron Sharp, Peter Fields, and Les Binet, and many others actually are talking about those things. So they're still going on quite strong. But also need to understand the new things and the new ways how we can express the brands and express the companies and organize the companies to actually really seize on the opportunity then that the new spaces, new channels, and the new ways of thinking, and of course the new kinds of behaviors that the consumers exhibit actually can turn into good, profitable, and good business strategy. That, I think, is the trick. And it's exactly the same as it used to be, but Corona has accelerated that. Apart from that, there's a few other things probably I feel are worth thinking about. One is that there was a recent Google research that actually showed there's kind of three kinds of behavior now, consumer-wise, that they've noticed through the search patterns in the last year or so, particularly after the Corona struck. One is that there was a very quick kind of growth in the new behaviors, and then a relatively quick going back to the old ways of behaving and thinking. So it was kind of picking up on a particular very acute trend, or maybe a complication that Corona has brought. But then the moment that that particular bit is kind of gone back to the normal, the behavior went back to the normal. However, in the middle, and that basically that particular behavior by the consumers required a very quick, agile adaptation and response by the companies. However, the second one is sort of in the middle. There was the uptake of the new behaviors, but the return to normal wasn't as complete as in the first case. Basically, people have adopted some of the new behaviors, and it seems that those kind of new behaviors, new ways of thinking, have become or are becoming a habit. And then the third one is what we can see, again, accelerated by Corona, slower but steady growth in changing long-term habits and long-term behaviors, which again requires not just a quick response by a company, but a real thorough rethinking of the ways that they do business, of the ways that they engage with their consumers, and the way that they use data, and many, many other things.
Thanks for this. Well said. A good overview, and some of those things that we have seen and experienced. And I'm kind of having a feeling that we are talking that now it's digital first now, but it actually isn't. When we still look at the companies, how they operate, how they plan business and everything else, it's still like we're still going to do this, but we're going to wait for the next period where we can go back to the old. That's kind of something that I'm seeing.
In some ways that's going to happen, but again, I don't think it's going to happen with everything across the board. And again, I think that the lottery ticket is to bet on which things are going to go back to normal, which things are not, and where kind of the halfway things, where some of the things are going to change and some others won't. So I think that requires really agile mind to constantly scan, observe what's going on in the market, and then respond accordingly. But I would go back to Professor Mark Ritzen's piece, one of the pieces that he wrote some time ago. It's like three concentric circles. And the outer circle is the tactical circle, the things that are changing very, very quickly. And that, of course, Corona and many other things, digital overall, as we call it, is actually a constant tornado of new things, of changing, constantly shifting and changing things very quickly, very often. And we tend sometimes to get completely blinded by that blizzard. And we think that's the thing to focus on. And it's completely tactical. And if we just focus on that, then we don't have any direction to go to. We just kind of are scrambling between one and the next tactical thing without the right direction, basically. And it's confusing and it's very frustrating for many marketers. We know that. The inner concentric circle is the strategy circle. And that's actually the bit that it's not moving as fast. That means that we can still see the overall direction that we are going to. Some of the consumer patterns are long-term patterns, some of the media patterns are long-term patterns, and we can still plan the strategy based on that. Always tweaking through tactics, but still there is a narrative, there is a direction that we are going to. And then finally, the innermost circle is the consumer circle. And that's, again, live people. There's consumers at the center of it, and we simply should not forget that we are talking to human beings with the evolution of about a million years or so behind us, and many of the things, how we respond to different things, are more or less the same. Some of the ways how we can address that could be different, but the basic drivers are more or less the same. We are anxious, we are confused, we are always concerned about three things: survival, status, and mating. And any brand who really understands that and kind of plans whatever the category around those three things, I would say, would do well.
Yeah, I love that piece by Mark Ritson. We reached out actually to him because we wanted to get him on the podcast, but still without success. Hopefully it will happen. Yeah, but anyway, those things that you mentioned, I'm also seeing it now. Like when we started Funky Marketing, we focus on B2B and kind of get the B2C things when it comes to like creativity, feelings, emotions, and get them into the B2B. And I'm starting to see the change. Like B2B companies are actually starting to think about people, especially now that we are in mostly working with tech-based companies. They realize that their biggest assets are actually the people that have skills inside them, that build software, that build technologies, and all those kind of things.
Yep, well, exactly. And again, it always depends how we define B2B, because if we are in the retail part of the B2B, a B2B company can have thousands of smaller customers, like a bank can have kind of thousands of small businesses as clients. That's B2B, but actually behaves in almost any respect as a B2C way of thinking. So yes, it depends. And we knew that for years now, many years actually, creatives and successful case studies from the B2B marketing actually always shown that introducing emotion does produce better results, or sometimes can produce spectacular results. And also when you look at the very basic ways how the brain works, we simply cannot make a decision without emotion. We do know about people who actually had brain damage where emotional processing was damaged, and they simply could not make a single decision. So we know that in every single decision, whatever the decision is going to be, emotion is always present. So these are kind of some of the basic things. And the problem is that the B2B, so-called B2B category tends to be quite conservative, and people are simply used to doing things business as usual, also focusing on the top of the funnel. But one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've noticed with some of the clients that I used to work with, I'm not doing consulting anymore, but when I was doing it now, I'm just teaching them how to do it, is actually mapping out the customer journey, mapping out particularly or using the opportunities within the middle of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel. Because with many of them, these are the parts that nobody touches. And that's actually where a lot of value is being lost and locked in. If they manage to unlock it suddenly, they are shocked actually with how much money they're wasting in that part of the funnel. So yeah, many of the old things still work. We just, again, I think the trick is to unpick which of the old things to keep doing, and emotionalization is certainly one of them. Mapping out the customer journey across the board is certainly one of them. And then actually how, based on defining those moments that matter across the customer journey, how we can frame, contextually frame the story of the company, product, services, whatever we do in the best possible contextual way, given the people that we've got on the other side.
Yeah, no, looking at the old ways of doing and letting go of some of them that we don't want to keep doing, and introducing some of the new ways. Like, how do you see what happens with the marketing, advertising, particularly agencies in the future? Because a lot of them were focused especially on the old, and there has been some changes, especially now there is Corona. Some of them were left out of the work. Then I think the vendor management is something also that companies needs now to learn how to do well. But having all that in mind, what happens with the advertising agencies in the future?
Yes, it's a good question. Actually, I was writing about that in the book I've done with Justin Kirby a few years ago in London, called The Definitive Guide to Strategic Content Marketing. And the content was actually just a framework of observing what's happening with the market. And there's several dynamics actually. And even now, when I talk to my friends from various agencies, it's not a pretty picture. We see the first thing that we see for many of the channels and many of the approaches is that the effectiveness of traditional advertising is going down. It's going down even in the mainstream channels such as TV and billboards and press, but it's overall the interruption model is actually going down. And that's why everybody started talking about storytelling as if we've discovered something new, right? The oldest thing in the world is now suddenly new because we remember that actually there's something in telling good stories. Yeah, it's a bit of a silly thing. However, we realize that interruption, particularly in the digital space, simply does not work well, or not as well as it used to work in the old media world. So that's kind of one thing. Whoever's business model is wedded to just interruption, they're under strain. There's a very kind of small number of super high-performing creative agencies that still have enough work. Everybody else is kind of under stress. So they have to diversify. They have to diversify the kind of things that they do. They have to diversify their business models as well, which is not easy, given that most of them have one-way business models where they just make money on one thing or maybe two things and that's it. Now changing that, breaking the machine down, reassembling it in a new way, while keep making money while the machine is torn apart is a really, really difficult thing to do. So many of them are actually not in a good place. Also, clients are in-sourcing, in-housing a lot of work. In 2019, as far as I remember, Unilever has reduced the number of their agencies on a global roster by 50%, from 3,000 agencies to 1,500 agencies, which means 50% cut. 1,500 agencies got fired by this global client, the second largest advertiser in the world. And also they reduced the number of ads. They said they're going to reduce the number of ads by the end of that year by 30%. Where did the money go? It went into content, it went into commerce, it went into data, into communities and various other things that are not traditional interruption advertising. So that's kind of another big hit by agency, because a lot of the clients are in-housing creative work now, and outsourcing only a specific kind of skills that it's more difficult for them to replicate internally. And then there's the different entrants, the media agencies who are skilling up in creative. There is of course, the new kinds of the digital agencies who are doing that. AKQA was a champion in kind of great creativity even before Corona. RGA with systems and stories is a great performer. But the most surprising thing is the management consultants actually going downstream. So Accenture Digital, or Accenture Interactive, it used to be called. Accenture bought two great agencies in the last 10 years. First, it was Karmarama, highly respected creative agency. And then a few years ago, it was Droga 5, now being part of Accenture. And last summer, I was judging one of the drum awards in London. And actually the Grand Prix for the whole of the awards was actually Accenture Interactive, one of their campaigns in Ireland. So the management consultants have won a Grand Prix for a premium creative award. And that tells you a lot, actually, because these guys have realized that the whole thing now is called customer experience management, CEM or CXM, different kind of acronyms for that, which means that across the whole of the customer journey, there's lots of opportunities to tell great stories, not just at the top of the funnel. And for that, you need to merge two things. One, great storytellers, and the second one, understanding how the customer journey works, how the platforms work, and all the touch points and moments that matter within the touch points that basically we can enhance, and the experience that we can enhance if we merge the data and the stories. And that's why these guys are punching really hard as well. So all of those things are now, and of course, clients being now more reluctant to with budgets to go traditional ways while they're figuring out what to do, blah, blah, blah. But the point being that being in a traditional agency, or particularly creative advertising agency now, is a more challenging, I think never been more challenging than today. Lots of different new business models being tried, lots of different organizational models being tried. But frankly, even Martin Sorrell, after WPP, the new venture that he's got is not a traditional set of advertising agencies, something completely different and more akin to the upstream strategic work across the whole of the customer journey.
That it is something that I'm also seeing, and great overview. What I was thinking is that do you see the same? Because I'm seeing that content is more and more companies are having content teams in-house and developing those things. And I think it's a good move. And is that going to affect also the agencies? And if yes, in which way?
Well, it's a very good question, as a matter of fact. First of all, it's the question of how we define content, of course. And in the book, we've identified from more than 100 different definitions, kind of about 5 big ways to frame it. 2 of the most important ones being it's something people actually actively want to see, want to spend the time and attention on. And the second one is the poetics. It just feels different from traditional advertising, less cliches, more authentic, and so on and so forth. Very often much longer. So basically, content could be one of the things that is something that a lot of people are looking for as a potential solution, particularly clients Why? Well, I use one short mantra to kind of try to explain that. What used to be emotional doesn't have to be expensive anymore. And what used to be useful doesn't have to be boring anymore. So basically, the emotional bit, when we talk about great storytelling and emotionalization, we tended to think about a particular specialist team, usually from an agency, an expensive team, coming with another expensive production company, lots of expensive gear, spending a lot of time shooting, then editing, then post-production, and then finally, after a while and a lot of money spent, we get something which is 15 or 30 seconds long, and then we have to spend even more money to actually promote it or for people to be able to see it. And that's not the case anymore, simply because we are not talking about traditional advertising anymore, and we're not talking interruption model anymore. YouTubers and kind of many other, we call them influencers, right? But many other grassroots influencers and marketers have shown us that it doesn't have to be that way. So many of the YouTubers, for example, have built their credibility and tens of millions of subscribers. I mean, only there's a very few brands that can come close to that, and it's kind of a relatively standard thing in the YouTube world for the A-listers to have at least 20 million subscribers. We can almost count the number of brands with that number of subscribers, so literally on one hand, maybe two, okay, but not more than that. So the bottom line being that they figure out how to be emotional and relevant in very cheap ways, which is basically talking about things that people are interested in, starting from the other end, not about the brand and the glamorous monologue of, as one of my ex-clients called it, of advertising, but actually being more relevant to what people actually need and want to hear about. And for that, very often you don't need very expensive equipment, and you don't need a hugely expensive team. You can actually do it on a cheap. And if you've got a well-trained or good, well-chosen people inside the company, well, one of your technologists, one of your factory workers could actually become the star, could become the storyteller that is going to tell the story about a product or a brand in a much better way than agency almost, or many of the agencies would be able to. So I think that this is one of the reasons that many of the things that we would call content now, many of the formats are not advertising formats, and simply could be done on the cheap, or certainly cheaper than the traditional ways of producing commercials. And that's also one of the reasons why the whole tide is going in that direction.
While I was listening to what you were saying, I remembered Peter McKinnon, one of the big stars of YouTube, and guy who is like doing filming and photo shooting and all those kind of things. And he, as a YouTuber, got invited to shoot a commercial for the big automotive brand. And exactly what he was saying, like, these are the things that didn't happen before. Like, it's me and my little team shooting a commercial for a huge brand. And that's the change that is happening. The quality remains the same or even becomes better because there's an emotional touch involved.
Well, the quality, the technical quality almost kind of is not even important, but the quality is different. I think that's the key word. The quality is different. The kind of storytelling is different. Yeah, there's no traditional advertising cliches, simply because you don't have seconds. In the digital space, there are no seconds. There's no restrictions of space. You've got as much time and as much space as you would want to have. Which means that the quality of the storytelling becomes really important. And as far as I know, every single year, when you look at the branded videos on YouTube, for example, every single year, the top 10 most viewed videos are all, as far as I know, more than 3 minutes long. So that simply means that time is not a problem. The quality of the storytelling is the problem.
Do you see maybe in the next year or years, AI be the factor that's gonna change something drastically, or it will just make things easier when it comes to like creating content, for example?
Well, I think it really depends again, what's the purpose for AI? And there's a lot of different kind of ways how we can use AI. So at the zoo, we've used AI, for example, with a fashion brand, the German fashion brand, that the AI was trained to look at the personal data and then based on the personal data of a consumer, actually create the dress or a piece of clothing that was based on the client's data, that actually had data as design patterns woven into the clothing, but also that the style, overall style of the clothing reflected the taste of the consumer as far as the AI understood it. So in that particular sense, it's nothing to do with communications, nothing to do with advertising. It was just that AI was creating a completely new way to create products and think about design. The other way to use AI is the data, of course. The intelligent systems are now able to spot many more patterns or micro patterns in the consumer's behavior in order to be able to hyper optimize the media strategy, the media placement, but also in some ways to optimize the creative as well based on the templated executions. You've got like 4 or 5 different things in an ad that could be templated. Then the AI becomes really, really good at optimizing based on the signals, based on the actual behavior, and then squeezing out a lot more of the new value from the media activities and the media placements than before. And then is the question of whether AI can create new ads and successful ads. I wouldn't comment on that one. I'm not scanning that space as thoroughly as I'd used before, but let me put it this way. According to some calculations, about 60% of all of the global advertising would be easily templated. And frankly, I can see AI doing that job really, really well in the next few years, which means that the remaining part is going to be the domain of the super creative storytellers, because we still need that. We crave stories. It's just that those stories may not look like traditional ads of the old kind. I mean, some of them will, because great storytelling is great storytelling, right? It's just that the repertoire of storytelling techniques is going to be, I think, more resembling novels and documentaries and feature films than advertising.
I love that potential of that kind of future. That's something that I love, and it means that we will have really unique storytellers telling the stories, and actually that will be the factor that differentiate us, right?
It could be that, but there's also, we very often talk about Google or the other side of the coin, the flip side of the coin. So AI, artificial intelligence, but also IA, intelligence augmented, which means just using machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually augment my own human thinking and actually giving me insights again from the data patterns. That was sort of what I was doing with my team at the zoo. I had 2 data scientists. We never use that expression formally, but I kind of like to think of the 2 of them as being the world's first creative data scientists, because the 2 of them were data scientists and data experts. They go into the Google's matrix, and then actually they spend some time in that huge data matrix, and they come out of that with great stories, great insights for great stories. And I think that actually artificial intelligence may help traditional strategists and traditional creatives actually finding really good insights, strong insights, maybe faster, maybe easier than just me, like an ex-strategist spending days and weeks, sometimes poring over a vast amount of data, trying to spot a really good insight. This could be now happening and is happening actually much quicker. So it's not that the machine that is creating anything, but the machine is actually giving me fantastic doors that I can actually walk into a great story, into a great execution.
Is having all kinds of data available to us changing something when it comes to measuring content?
No, I don't think so. We had a whole chapter dedicated to it in the book. No, everything I've seen in the personal practice and experience, and also talking to various other very experienced people in this area, the measurement has not changed at all. Meaning it's still exactly the same philosophy and approach. You measure what you're trying to achieve. Meaning if you're trying to achieve awareness, we measure whether we've achieved awareness. If you're trying to achieve any shifts in the brand measures, such as emotional proximity, for example, or salience or anything else, you measure exactly that. If you're trying to measure a conversion, we measure conversion, or any sort of other impacts or effects that we can produce, it's the same set of measures, it's the same set of things that we are measuring. We're just kind of deploying different tools to try to produce better results. And Robert Rose actually said in his interview for the book, every single time when they've actually deployed at Digitals, I believe, every single time when they deploy content against specific measures and against traditional formats, content actually performed better, provided, of course, that it's well done. So the measure, we're using exactly the same thing. We always measure what we're trying to achieve. We always start with the strategy and objectives, and that's what we measure. And that we're just comparing and seeing whether content deployment has worked better or maybe in different ways for those particular objectives compared to the traditional ways.
Exactly, and this is something not only connected to the content, but with things that we want to achieve. Based on that, we go back, reverse engineer, and come up with the things that we need to do.
With anything, frankly, with anything. But I think that debate, I have to say, I was in the same boat before I went to Google, and then before I scanned the whole market and started making sense out of it all. I was also confused, and I thought that content is something different, and then you need to have some different, ways to measure. I really don't think that now. I think it's just kind of a different set of tools to achieve exactly the same results, because ultimately we are talking about exactly the same effects we are trying to produce in the hearts and minds of our audiences. We are trying to achieve cut-through, or as Byron Sharp would call it, mental availability. And within the concept of mental availability, all these different things that we actually are trying to elicit in the minds and hearts of our audiences. And we're just using a broader set of tools and formats for that. But the measurement itself, I don't think we need many more different things.
Let's talk a little bit about ethics. I remember that topic, and it stays on top of my mind every day, basically, no matter what I do. From the moment that I met Miljenko Dereta, the founder of Civic Initiative and basically founder of Civic Society in Serbia, and while I was we received the award for youth policies, working with youth from vulnerable groups in Serbia, and I asked him what's next. We were having sort of an informal chat, and what's next? And he told me, there's no stopping. Fight for good never stops. And this is kind of some thought that stayed with me the whole time. And actually, some of those things I think we are trying to do with Funky Marketing to kind of bring back the ethics into the marketing, because I think we lost them somewhere along the way.
Oh, very, very true. And I completely agree with the sentiment. A better world is a journey, not a destination. We're just never going to arrive. We can only arrive at certain kind of different levels of goodness, I would say, but there's no ultimate destination, and that requires constant work. And God knows that today, in the world that we've got today, we are seeing very, very strong challenges around the ethics in marketing, in the broadest possible sense. First of all, there's lots of challenges with data and the collection and the usage of our data without our knowledge, without our control. What Professor Mara Einstein was referring to, she wrote a book called Black Ops Advertising, but now this is Black Ops Marketing, or everything. There's a lot of data and data manipulations being done without our knowledge, and then returned back to us again without our knowledge, in order to manipulate us and influence us. And we don't have control over that, which is wrong. The second one is the manipulation of the interface itself. It's a bizarre thing that no country in the world regulates interface itself. And if you go to a website called darkui.org, we can see how even the biggest of brands actually manipulate the interface itself in order to hoodwink us and get money from us without us being either aware of that or being aware of that, but too late after something already happened. So interface manipulation is another thing. Then we got another kind of black ops ethical challenges, which is the addictiveness of the digital platforms, particularly mobile phones. The whole thing that was in a lot of detail explained in the Social Dilemma documentary that we saw recently. And again, that was common knowledge in the industry. It just kind of hit the mainstream. and people are surprised. But I know for 10, 15 years in the industry, we were talking about how to make things as addictive and as sticky as possible. And I think that some people are only now seeing the consequences of that. Also, we got the challenges of the empathic media, media being able to read our moods more and more. And if we know that anxious people buy more, that angry people click more, that depressive people also buy more, it's the question actually whether it's in the commercial interest of those systems to keep us in those states for as long as possible, simply because it's very profitable, or not. We also have the challenges of the native advertising. As it's usually referred to as the break in the wall between the church and the state, between the editorial departments and the marketing departments, because now it's more and more difficult actually to see, particularly if it's well done, as a really well done native piece. It's really difficult to see whether it's been written in a bona fide journalistic manner, meaning independently, and that's the kind of point of view of a journalist who is trying to do a balanced piece, or there was some money that was actually paid for a particular company to kind of come out as a hero, as a winner in that particular piece, either more or less subtly. And as we know in Serbia, for example, more than half, as far as I know, according to one statistics, more than half of the annual revenue of all 4 or 5 of the biggest news portals in Serbia are made from native. Which completely and utterly ruins the trust in the media in our country, but it's happening in other countries as well. And that's a big, big, real danger. And nobody knows what to do about it, because that seems to be the best way of financing the media at the moment. And it seems there's no other ways for that. And then finally, there's the Neil Postman's challenge, ethical challenge, for me, a pretty big one, which is basically that modern advertising is a huge industrial complex for trivializing our lives. Basically, I was one of those guys, using mythologies and archetypal storytelling, archetypal narratives to imbue trivial everyday things with desire. And the question is whether that's now good, and whether we should stop doing that, at least to a certain extent, because of that, our seas, our oceans are full of plastic. That plastic is now finding its way into the bodies of unborn babies. We are polluting the planet. We are simply making this earth utterly uninhabitable for us. And advertising is a huge accomplice in that thing.
It sort of reminds me of the topic for this year's Cactus Festival. Is advertising going to change the world, or in better or in worse?
Well, so far it's been for the worse, but particularly with the neoliberal paradigm. And I had several pieces that I've written recently exactly on that particular thing, and even having heated debates with my friends and ex-colleagues from the industry as well. I don't think that, well, storytelling, I wouldn't say advertising, although advertising is storytelling, but storytelling can save the world, because what we are seeing now is the breakdown of the old narratives. And that's the problem, because people think that there are no new narratives, and they do exist, but actually it's in nobody's interest, I mean particularly the political economic elites, to propose the new narratives, because at the moment they're still not making money on them. The moment that the whole thing breaks down, and that could be a really nasty period in our future history, recent future history, we may go through some pretty nasty shit before we wise up. And because we are wising up, then the commercial interests are going to follow, and the political interests are going to follow as well, that we kind of may adopt these new narratives. But they do exist. They're just people on the street are not aware of them. So I'm not sure that advertising is going to save the world, but certainly new narratives, new stories are going to save the world.
Sounds great. I wanted to ask you something like maybe more specific. What would you recommend to people working in, let's say, marketing industry in general? We don't need to go deeper than that. What are 2 things that you're seeing and maybe you can recommend to them to double down in 2021, having in mind like where we are living, what is the situation with the pandemic and how things are changing, those kind of things?
in order to make what they do more effective, or in some other ways? What do you have in mind?
Yeah, definitely.
More effective. Okay. I would say, first of all, realize that we live in the hyper skippable world. It's never been easier to ignore things in the modern media space, and people are ignoring it and will ignore it. So the big question posed in 1986 by Tony Stead, one of the fathers of account planning, and actually the guy who named the discipline account planning, he posed that big question, which was, and why the fuck would they? They is the consumers. Why would they pay attention to what you have to say? Why would they give you their attention and time? Why would they think, feel, and do whatever you like them to do? That's always been the key question in everything we did. So it's still perfectly valid today. And it's much easier to ignore brands in the modern media space, and actually never been easier to ignore brands than in the modern media space. So the first thing is the skippability. How are you going to break through the skippability barrier? And it's not going to be the frequency, it's not going to be just the frequency and just interruption. It has to be something else. We know that now. The second thing is talk about your people, your customers, not about yourself all the time. We, again, from Google research, we know that about 80% of the consumers asked actually say, I would like actually brands to reflect what they can do for me. I don't want to hear so much of their glamorous monologues about how great they are. I really do kind of want to see their role, more of their specific role in my specific life. And then the second thing aligned to that one is, if they talk about themselves, I also want them to tell me how they're preparing for this world and why I should trust them that they're still going to be existing in 3 years' time. What are you doing in order to make yourself more robust, more resilient, and to actually survive? And this particularly is important for B2B, because in the B2B world, if I'm just about to kind of invest $500,000 into you as a vendor, as a supplier, as a partner, I really need to be convinced that actually you know how to go through this particular storm. And then the fourth thing is what Mark Ritson mentioned already. Do not get blinded just by the tactical whirlwind that is happening in all these kind of media. Focus on your customers, focus on your strategy, know exactly where you're going, why you're going there, and then deploy any tool that comes handy to you to achieve your objectives. Without objectives, we are just lost at sea.
I was thinking about those things that you are saying, and there's actually two questions for the end. First one is, how would you define funky marketing? This is something that I ask all the guests, having in mind the name of the company. And the second one is there something that we didn't mention, not something we didn't say, that you want to emphasize or share for the end for the audience?
Funky marketing is, I see it as being one of the forums, and high quality forums, where we can talk about all these kind of important things, and hopefully collectively, when we can put all the discussions together, a slightly more clear picture on what's going on will emerge for people who are your listeners and engaging with you, that some things are going to be slightly more clear, and they're going to be having more defined ways to actually plan their own work and lives as well. The thing that we didn't say, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting one. Well, I would say storytelling, or the kind of archetypal narrative storytelling that marketing communications, I would look at the kind of whole broader discipline of marketing and communications and branding, not just advertising, deploys, is an incredibly powerful tool, and could be used for a lot of good things and for a lot of bad things. It can stimulate basic impulses on an everyday level that we completely mindlessly consume without kind of thinking what the consequences are going to be. Or it could be used to kind of turn our heads into the more enlightened directions, and actually start making us think about the world and the planet that we are on. And I would say for young people who are planning or going into the marketing industry, certainly go there, for a few years, learn the ropes, learn the craft, learn how to tell great stories, and then just fuck off. Just leave the area, leave the industry, go and set up your own thing, help people who are really doing great, good things, who are really trying to make things better, or even better, set up your own company that is going to do things better, your own product, services, NGOs, whatever, and use the storytelling knowledge to actually help your mission and your idea become more popular, more accepted, and more widely known. Because it is a powerful set of tools. I just don't think we should be wasting it anymore on mythologizing trivial products.
Love it. Thank you for this, and thank you for taking time to join me here on Funky Marketing Podcast and talk about marketing, business, life in general, and all those other things. I hope we'll have a chance to chat again in the future and see if those things that we mentioned are actually happening.
I truly hope so myself, and thank you very much for the invite once again, and hopefully this episode has achieved its particular result of introducing some new narratives and maybe being a challenging piece of content in its own right, at least a little bit. Thank you once again. All the best in the new year to you and your listeners and viewers.
Thank you.